Okay, taxes and tariffs and inflation. Totally boring topics, but when you put them together and they have an effect on gold price, we need to at least take a look. So we're going to cover a few things related to the incoming U.S. presidential administration and that effect on gold price. Does it go up? Does it go down? Maybe it does both. The reason I say administration rather than just Trump is that there's a lot more to this. Trump just lobbed a threat to BRICS member nations, writing that countries who support the creation of a new currency that would be to replace the US dollar would face 100% tariffs. He went on to write that they should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. His words. Now, you can take from that Trump is big on tariffs, but enter Scott Bessent, new Treasury Secretary. He's going to be a good example here. He's pro-tariffs, but his views are a lot more tempered than Trump, so you can assume the end result would probably be somewhere between the two. Trump might still be in campaign mode, so maybe we just dial it back a little bit. Either way, tariffs are the hot topic for the incoming policy changes, and if we want to look at past impacts of tariffs, there are a few obvious standout points in American history we could look at. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act from 1930 under President Hoover, that's one. And then we have the 1971 Nixon shock under Nixon, unsurprisingly. Now, those two events both famously led to higher inflation and unemployment, but we're going to stick to inflation. The part that gets really interesting to people who are really interested in gold is that those events actually tie to some big moves in gold prices, some really big moves. But before we try to make that direct connection here, let's just point out the gold standard was abandoned for domestic transactions in 1933. And private gold ownership was banned in the US, so there was a lot going on. And then the gold standard was officially dropped for international convertibility in 1971. Again, kind of a big deal. And like I mentioned, those dates either line up in the 30s or the 70s. So let's do a little bit of extrapolation here because it seems like that is popular. Now, a quick shout out to channel sponsors Summit Metals. They've got gold and silver if you're looking for it. Great prices, fast shipping. Now, some of you have already checked them out. I appreciate giving them a shot. If you haven't, summitmetals.com. So we should probably say here that planning for what could happen in 2025 with new tariffs is going to be a little bit harder than all of this, but we're going to look back and cover what happened to gold during those timeframes that I just mentioned. So as a little bit of history here, starting with the 30s, gold was valued at $20.67 before it was nationalized in 1934. And then it was raised to $35 an ounce immediately following. So great trick that resulted in a 69% increase right after paying the prior market value to anyone who turned in their private holdings. Now, bigger picture though, it meant an immediate boost to both inflation and the value of the federal gold reserves. Now, if we were just looking at the price of gold, that's nothing. Between 1971 and 1974, gold went from $38 an ounce to $195 an ounce, and then all the way to $850 an ounce by January of 1980. So that's a 2,300% gain in a decade. And yeah, you heard that right, 2,300% gain. So this is the basis used by a lot of people who call for moonshots. When somebody says 20x or more, they're referencing this one way or another. Now, we can't attribute that directly to the addition of tariffs, but we can agree it's an interesting correlation. So let's just take a step back and think about what tariffs mean to the overall economy. If you just think about the impact on price of everyday goods, if we increase tariffs on imports, well, the exporters need to increase their own prices. That's to cover their increased costs. Those countries will most likely reciprocate and add their own tariffs on U.S. exports. That results in a similar price hike. But now you're also looking at an impact on how successful the U.S. exporters are. So that's where we start to see the unemployment numbers spiking. But again, I said I wasn't going to cover that here. So the resulting increase in gold price does not come from the tariffs, but you can see the chain of events here. Increased cost of goods leads to inflation, which leads to money printing, which leads to dollars being worth less. That means the nominal price of commodities goes up. Now, how much it goes up, that's the big question, but bank analysts are taking all of this into consideration. Quite a few of them are saying $3,000 gold in 2025. Now, that would be a 13% increase from where we are today, and that might seem like a big number, except we've seen a 30% increase in gold price so far in 2024. These big rallies, double-digit increases, kind of feel normalized. So I've been cautious around here about throwing out crazy predictions. How come? Well, I've seen some things. And recently, now that's not to say that I won't mention other people's crazy predictions. I've mentioned quite a few. I mentioned an individual who talks about $12,000 gold per ounce, $20,000 gold, $50,000 gold. Those numbers would be like the decade after the Nixon shock, a decade that had reasons for that 2,300% increase in gold price that no longer exists, that could never happen again. So in other words, I don't take those kinds of predictions seriously. Now, the more meaningful comparison to me would be what happened in 2011 and 2013. I was going to try to grab one of these for effect, but I don't think I have one. Anyway, we saw a crazy run followed by a crash. I find that meaningful only in the Icarus way, where if the flying kid gets too close to the sun, well, the wax holding his wings together melts and we get a crash. If a gold rally is too strong to support the new price, we likely see it correct. Now, what's a video like this without a chart? I mentioned the Nixon shock from 1971. We can see the price of gold shooting all the way up to $850 by 1980. We can also see it crash to $310 2 years later. And we can see that it didn't hit that level again, $850, until 2008, 26 years later. So let's try not to get caught up saying, yeah, 2,300% gains on gold would make good sense, because that is not normal. It's not something we should expect to see happen next year. Now, compared to that, everything else seems minor. Even 2011, a year that we all think of as a crazy rally, where gold shot from $850 to $1,950, big all-time high. Well, that's a 58% gain. And then we can also see that the spike to $1,930 dropped to $1,050 by 2015. So $850 to $1,050, that would have been solid, but we got a little excited in between. And then, as we all know, it took 9 years to reclaim that 1930 all-time high. We saw that happen in 2020. Now, on the practical side here, we're going to see tariffs have some kind of impact on gold. I just don't see a case for it not leading to higher prices, but I would never rule out a big pullback on any kind of breakout price rally. Now, this is why I look at a possible 13% increase in gold price rather than talking about 600%. 1,000% or even a 2,300% increase in gold. Now, sure, it happened, but now we know why. And we know that it's in no way likely to repeat, not 2,300% gain in gold price. But if we did look at those wild rallies and pick out the following crashes, we see that even in the case of that 2,300% run up in 1980, it was followed only by a 64% crash. Or we could look at the 2011 spike and the 2013 crash leading down to 2015's low. Well, that was a 46% fall that took 4 years. So those are the wild extremes. Now, bringing this back to what's happening right now and the likely events, meaning tariffs and inflation, I'm not going to get caught up in unlikely possibilities of these runaway price rallies or huge crashes. And what we're seeing right now is definitely a big rally, and there's always a possibility of a correction, but we don't have the kinds of factors that played directly into gold prices in the 70s or in the 30s. Now, those are fun comparisons maybe, but that's all they are. Realistically, we haven't seen high tariffs since the end of World War II and the Bretton Woods Agreement and GATT. So it's hard to model against past uses. The only comparative time frame would really be Trump's first presidency. The price of gold at the start of his term in January of 2017 was $1,209, and by the end of his term in January of 2021, it had shot up to $1,839, so 52% increase, something we should at least keep in mind. Now, we have an asterisk to consider. We need to mention that there was a pandemic in there, of course, but Trump did implement new tariffs on Chinese goods, and that shook some things up. There was also some tension with Iran in there, so both of those things should at least seem familiar. Now, does this mean that we're going to see a 52% increase in gold over Trump's next term? Probably not. It could go either way, but we at least have a view on what tariffs mean for inflation and what that then means for gold price. Now, here's a chart, by the way, of where federal revenue comes from. Trump's view is that more should come from tariffs, less should come from income and payroll tax. So you can see it's a big shift in strategy. I think the safe thing to say here is that we're not going to see 2,300% increase in gold price. I could be wrong, but that's the safe bet. So you really have two different ways to go at this. The first is that you can buy on a schedule, you can average your cost, and the second would be trying to forecast these wild events and time the tops and the bottoms. Now, either way, I think the analysts calling for the rally to keep on that hunt for $3,000, or at least for the rally to keep pushing up, is the most likely case. Now, I think that we will see a correction at some point as well, but knowing price tops, price bottoms, that's a trick that nobody seems to be good at. If you were to take all the speculation from the analysts out there putting out price predictions for gold, you would say the price band probably looks like just over $3,000 on the high end and $2,350 on the low end. Now, that's for 2025, not for the next 4-year term, but what that means to me is that going all in now or waiting for some kind of massive crash really doesn't make much sense. The boring dollar cost average we hear about over and over does. Let's call it good there. Let us know what you think about gold price over the next year, over the next 4 years. Where do you think it goes? Do you think it goes up more than 52%? Or do you think we get a crash? Let us know. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you want to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.